Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
Handguns, John. Are you hunting deer with handguns? With semi-automatic rifles? This isn't about hunting.
I think what people want from government is for the services that government should be delivering to be delivered.
From public safety to housing to the cost of living, BC's three main party leaders square off in their first debate. Plus, police say 3 youths have been arrested after an attack on a teenage girl in a Kelowna park. And we have another exclusive on a BC Housing affordable home ownership plan in Victoria amid allegations people abused the program.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Hello, I'm Dan Burritt. Thanks for joining us. Mounties in Kelowna say they have arrested 3 young people after a 13-year-old girl was attacked in a park last Friday. The CBC's Lindsay Duncombe has more from the girl's parents.
There were more than 30 kids in the crowd. We've blurred the video and aren't showing the attack, but later in this clip, a 13-year-old girl is thrown to the ground and punched over and over. She stops moving. Dirt is kicked on her face. Her family says she has a concussion, cuts to her face, and injured ribs. We aren't identifying the victim or her family because of her age.
I had to lock myself in the house for the weekend. Just that's a rage that a father should never have to feel, so I still want everybody held accountable, and I won't stop till they are.
He says his daughter was lured to this lakeside park in Kelowna by a friend. Police say they identified 5 aggressors. 3 have been arrested and released with strict conditions. RCMP thanked 2 young people, one who tried to stop the fight and another who called police.
Of the 30-plus people that were standing around watching and taking video, you showed compassion and made the right decision.
RCMP say there were 41 incidents of youth violence in Kelowna in 2023, up from just 16 the year before. People who study teens and violence say social media makes it worse.
They get caught up in the fever pitch of the moment. What happens is that people's their sense of right and wrong is corrupted when the peer group is really agitated and excited like they are in this case.
Police want people to stop sharing the video.
The video is degrading, and the attempt is to humiliate. The sharing of evidence can negatively impact witnesses that we have yet to interview and the prosecution of this case.
The victim had just started high school. Her family says she's recovering from her injuries and receiving counseling. Lindsay Duncombe, CBC News, Vancouver.
BC's 3 main party leaders spent the day squaring off against each other. First debating on radio, then speaking in front of local business leaders. As Katie DeRosa explains, they're presenting vastly different visions on how to run this province.
You know, people are voting with their feet in terms of what we need to be doing.
Speaking to a room of business leaders in Vancouver, BC Conservative leader John Rustad claims NDP leader David Eby has created an affordability crisis that has pushed what he says is a record number of people out of the province.
And I get it, because after 7 years of our current government, you know, can anybody point to anything and say it's better?
Rustad says if he becomes premier, he would push for BC to have more control over who comes into the province through immigration, with more of a focus on matching people's skills to job openings.
We actually shouldn't be relying on Ottawa, 3,000 miles away, making those decisions on immigration.
Quebec is the only province that has the power to set its own immigration levels, while other provinces are bound by federal mandates. Eby has previously called for federal housing funding to be tied to immigration levels to keep up with BC's population growth. He says his government's housing legislation is having an impact.
We are the one province in Canada that showed rents coming down instead of going up.
BC Green Party leader Sonia Furstenau says her party is the only one focusing on how to lift people out of poverty.
We have an inequality problem in this province, and it's emerging in our communities, in our downtowns, in our growing homelessness crisis.
The tone between the three leaders was more heated during their radio debate on CKNW, particularly over public safety. Rustad doubled down on his statement that he would direct police to ignore certain sections of federal gun laws, which ban handguns and semi-automatic weapons.
There are law-abiding gun owners in this province that are being targeted by the federal government, and I disagree with that. And so I will not see our precious dollars that are being spent on law enforcement going after law-abiding guns. Instead, I will have them going after the criminals, going after the gangs.
I just find it astonishing that someone who says that public safety is a priority would take that vital tool away from police to enforce federal gun regulations against gangsters in our province. Police are lining up to say it's an absurd proposal.
He wants to go after
handguns, John. Are you hunting deer with handguns? With semi-automatic rifles? This isn't about hunting.
A former BC Police Chief and Solicitor General is doubtful of Rustad's plan.
If he became Premier of British Columbia, he does not have the power to direct the police to disregard a federal statute.
Firstenau argues public safety is tied to poverty. The three leaders will square off again in the televised debate on October 8th. Katie DeRosa, CBC News, Victoria.
And late in the day, Conservative leader John Rustad also announced a big proposed change to ICBC. Rustad says the Conservatives will end the insurance corporation's monopoly on basic auto insurance and allow for competition. He also wants to let people with life-altering injuries from crashes fight for support, a change he has pitched before. Rustad says the no-fault model introduced in 2021 leaves many unable to get the help they deserve. The NDP says the no-fault change helped ICBC become profitable after years of deficits. Earlier this week, the three main parties put forward their plans for public transit. The BC Greens want to make it free province-wide. The NDP are promising a rapid bus service from the North Shore to Burnaby, and the Conservatives are planning to address TransLink's growing deficit. The mayor of Port Coquitlam says, while he's pleased to see the issue on the agenda, TransLink's broken funding model still needs to be addressed.
TransLink will either need to come up with a new funding formula, which has to come from the provincial government because of legislation and their authority, or else they're going to have to significantly reduce their operating budget, which means very drastic cuts to service in the Metro Vancouver region.
TransLink says it faces a pending structural deficit of $600 million a year. City of North Vancouver Mayor Linda Buchanan says no new funding has been committed by the province after 2025. Still with transportation, a heads up for commuters. The Pattullo Bridge will be closed in both directions overnight starting this Sunday. The closure will begin at 10 p.m. and last until 5 a.m. for necessary inspections and repairs. After that, expect alternating closures over the next 4 nights to finish up any related work. Commuters are asked to use either the Portman or Alex Fraser bridges. 2 years before CBC News revealed dozens of people had allegedly abused a BC Housing affordable home ownership program in Victoria, the agency's leaders were warned there was a, quote, high risk that situation could become public. Our Jason Proctor has this exclusive follow-up.
Okay, this is going to be kind of a complex story, but I urge you to stick with it because we've learned out some really interesting new details about this affordable housing project that was supposed to help middle-income British Columbians in Victoria come into the housing market. You may recall we first broke this story back in March. It was this 135-unit condo in Victoria, built with the help of a $53 million loan from the province, that was subsidized so that the developer was able to sell units at about 12% below market rate to people as long as they promised to live there for 2 years and they didn't have a combined income of more than $150,000. What we found out last spring is that a number of people were accused of breaking the deals of that contract, renting places out, having income that way exceeded the amount that they were supposed to have for this. We put in a Freedom of Information request, which I got back last week. 4,000 pages, I've been pouring through it, and there's a few really interesting details in this. Prime among them, the fact that going back to April 2022, when BC Housing was looking for a loan to buy back some of these condos from people who'd broken the conditions of the affordable housing deal, the executive committee was told there was a high risk that this situation would become public, and a medium risk that the public would view it in a negative light, as an example of BC Housing being unable to prevent fraud or abuse. They had a communications plan in place, but what we've learned from emails contained in this FOI dump is that for some reason they chose not to go with that. There's another interesting part of this, which is that people at the time this project was completed were told, the public was told, that people had to not own property anywhere else in the world in order to qualify to buy in this project. In fact, according to this executive committee report, that rule was relaxed at the request of the developer. And so BC Housing agreed to that, meaning that people did and could own property in other parts of the world. And indeed, what's alleged in some of the court cases associated with this is some of the people that bought at this affordable housing project owned several homes worth millions of dollars in other places in British Columbia. Jason Proctor, CBC News, Vancouver.
As Israel stepped up its attacks across Lebanon this week, more and more people have been searching for a way to flee that country. And many people in BC are trying to get their families out, including a Vancouver woman whose parents arrived here late Tuesday night.
Even when they got on the flight, it was the most stressful time because at the same time there were fighter jets hitting the suburbs of Beirut, which are adjacent to the airport. And you would worry, like about accidents, not even intentional bombing of the plane, but accidents happening in the air. It's great to have them here, and I know they are safe, but with the rest of the family being there, it's still, everybody's very anxious and worried.
The Israeli military says more troops are being added to its ground offensive in southern Lebanon, and the world awaits Israel's response to Iran's missile bombardment. We'll have more on the violence in the Middle East later in the show. Darius Madavi joins us now with a first look at the weather. Not too bad today, South Coast-wise.
Yes, very sunny today. We got a little bit of snow up in the far north and on the mountaintops, but other than that, relatively calm day. A decent amount of precipitation coming to parts of the coast and breaking into the central interior as well, which is where we have that radar coverage, and you can see some of that snow coming to some of those mountaintops as well. If we zoom in here, you can see at times the rain precipitation was a little bit heavy, but as it continues to move further east, we will expect to see a few more showers breaking into the central interior over the next few days as well. One of the places in the interior that is looking the most wet over the next few days. Here on the south coast, as you said, Dan, fairly calm, a little bit of cloud coverage across much of BC today, but especially here on the south coast, clearing up throughout the day. So really from north to south, so the North Island, seeing some of that clearing and continuing to work its way down to Vancouver. So we've got a fairly clear night tonight. If we take a look at our precipitation forecast for the next few days here on the south coast, again, we're going to see that cloud build back in, especially to the North Island overnight tonight and into tomorrow morning. Then midday tomorrow, we see that precipitation arrive as well, midday to afternoon, and then it continues to work its way down the island, arriving here in Vancouver, not by the evening, but by Friday morning. So that's when we see that big wave of rain and precipitation. After that, really just some showery activity for the rest of the day on Friday. And then we're looking fairly dry and getting quite a bit warmer into the weekend, which we'll talk more about later this hour. But yeah, Dan, tonight we got a fairly calm night across BC, a little bit of precipitation in some places, but overall, very pleasant, very autumnal, just a bit chilly in many places.
Good use of autumnal. See you later. Still to come, Earth is getting a new neighbor for the next few months. We'll tell you what it is and where it is after this. has a new neighbor for the next few months. Here to tell us all about it and what it is and where is our science and climate specialist, Darius Madavi. What's with this mini-moon, sir?
I think the most important thing is it's just a little guy, Dan. It's about 11 meters in diameter, which is about the length of a school bus, but more round. It's an asteroid. It likely came from one of our solar system's secondary asteroid groups. So it's called the Arjuna asteroids. They're this group of near-Earth objects that have an orbit quite similar to Earth's, so astronomers know to keep a close eye on them. And let's just take a look at the path that it's expected to take. You can see here, coming in, swooping in, going just between Earth and the Moon, and then flying out again. But keep in mind, Earth and the Moon are very, very far apart. If Earth was the size of a basketball, the Moon would be the size of a tennis ball, and they would be about 30 feet apart, so a very big distance between these things. So the asteroid is not going to come, not expected to be a huge problem as it sweeps by. And yeah, it's going to come in. It's coming in pretty soon. It's coming, it did come in. It joined our orbit in September, just this past Sunday, and it's expected to stick around for about 2 months, stick around until November, and then on November 25th, we'll all wave it off, teary-eyed as it flies away.
Naturally. So it is technically an asteroid. Are we in any danger? Have to be cautious about it coming closer to Earth or hitting us?
Fortunately, no. It's quite small, and it's staying fairly far away. Again, this is a big distance. Let's take a look at the orbit again. But the asteroid was first discovered, as I said, on the asteroid was first discovered on August 7th, and then it first entered our orbit in September. It was discovered by ATLAS, which is called the Asteroid Terrestrial Impact Last Alert System. In South Africa. Asteroid Terrestrial Impact Last Alert System probably sounds scary, and you might be wondering why it wasn't picked up by the very early alert system. But this is very common. Space is a very big place, and asteroids are fairly small, especially ones that we don't really have to be concerned about. And it only took about a week, from August 7th to August 18th, for scientists to conclude that it was no threat, dropping it from the potential risk list of asteroids into just our friend that's coming to visit and swing by list of asteroids.
All right. So beyond the space enthusiasts, you and I here, can we see it with the naked eye?
No, I'm sorry. Afraid not. It is very small, the size of a school bus. When it's as far or further away than the Moon, is very difficult to pick up. Even if you have, a commercial telescope or a pair of stargazing binoculars, you're not going to be able to see this one. We're waiting for the big observatories to get a glimpse of it and get those pictures and send them down to us here. I know that the idea of having a mini moon sounds great, getting a photo with the 2 moons, like in Star Wars with the 2 suns, Halloween. I would love to see that, but unfortunately, that is not going to be the case here. But we know that it's there. We know we have a friend up there in the solar system, or in our orbit, really.
And I have to ask, does it have a name?
Yes, it is called 2024 PT5, which is... rolls right off the tongue, doesn't it?
Darius Madavi, thank you for telling us about 2024 PT5. Easy for me to say. Still to come, Hurricane Helene has now killed almost 180 people. Up next, why that number could keep rising and how some communities are being disproportionately affected. Stick around. The fighting and the rhetoric are heating up between Israel and Iran. Israel is threatening retaliation for Iran's missile attack and stepping up its military operations against Hezbollah, Iran's proxy in Lebanon. And as Chris Brown reports, Iran is now threatening more attacks against Israel's infrastructure.
Less than 48 hours after Israel sent ground troops into Lebanon, there are funerals for Israeli soldiers. A total of 8 Israelis were killed in fighting, with 7 other soldiers injured, making it the deadliest day for its military in nearly a year of clashes with the Iran-backed militant group. We are at the height of a difficult war against Iran's axis of evil, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said in a video as he offered condolences. Israel has announced it will send more troops into Lebanon, expanding the ground war with infantry and armor. It comes a day after Iran launched a huge salvo of ballistic missiles at targets throughout Israel in response, it says, for Israel's killing of top allies, including the leaders of Hezbollah and Hamas. Iran says it struck 3 air bases and Israeli intelligence facilities, none of it confirmed by Israel, which claims most of the missiles were intercepted. But there was damage.
The explosion occurred, and all the world, even here, was shaking.
83-year-old Shmulek Sakari emerged from his bomb shelter to find the blast from a nearby missile impact had blown out the windows of his home.
The house was a multitude of glasses, no doors, no windows, everything, the TV flown up.
With the Jewish New Year holiday Rosh Hashanah beginning, he says his emotions are conflicted.
It should be something happy, but it can't be inside us to be happy. We don't know where we are going, where they push us to go.
The missiles fired by Iran were aimed at Israel, but they didn't just fall there. Some fell here in the occupied West Bank, where the only confirmed fatality was reported. In Jericho, hundreds of Palestinians gathered for the funeral of Sameh el-Asali. In a terrible twist of fate, he was a construction worker from Gaza, stranded in the West Bank for more than a year after the October 7th attacks. His distraught father, Kader, told us his son was hit by falling debris. He wanted to go home and see his kids. He was waiting for a ceasefire so he could go home, he said. Israeli officials stressed again that a response to Iran's attack is coming. Another front in an expanding war that's claiming yet more lives. Chris Brown, CBC News in Jericho.
Tonight marks the beginning of Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year. It comes 5 days before the anniversary of the Hamas attack on southern Israel last October 7th. Alison Northcott reports on what's changed in a year in some of Canada's Jewish communities.
Security used to not be necessary in Canada. In houses of worship.
Rabbi Adam Shire says synagogues have stepped up security significantly since last year's attacks against Israel.
Everything has been different since October 7th. The way that we gather as a community, our regular morning services, afternoon services, Sabbath services, everything is different. We're doing even more and doing even better, and that's with professional security guards, that's with surveillance and technology.
With the Jewish high holidays beginning, security is top of mind. In the Montreal area, police say there were more than 120 reported hate crimes targeting the Jewish community over the past year, including a bullet shot through a school door. Montreal police say they'll have an enhanced presence around synagogues. And where there were once open-door policies, access is now strictly limited.
My synagogue provides a wristband so that I can physically show that I belong. These actions are different than every other year. Our doors are not open because we fear a threat.
Among some members of the Jewish community, there's anxiety and resolve.
We're strong, and we're going to stick together this Rosh Hashanah holiday. And I imagine every synagogue is going to be on high alert, high security.
I will go because it's my duty to show that I'm not afraid.
The added security comes with added costs.
We've had to spend almost $100,000 a month securing institutions here on the West Coast. It's tough.
But he says Jewish groups are grateful Ottawa is making it easier for more organizations within at-risk communities to access more federal money for things like private security guards.
Unfortunately, hate crimes have risen in Toronto, particularly targeting the Jewish community.
Toronto police will also increase patrols, with command posts in Jewish neighborhoods and near mosques as the first anniversary of the October 7th attacks approaches. Alison Northcott, CBC News, Montreal.
Hurricane Helene has now killed more than 180 people in the U.S. As Vanessa Lee explains, that number could keep rising for years, with new research showing major storms have lasting impacts that hit Black communities hardest.
With swaths of destruction at every turn, it's hard for survivors to know where to begin picking up the pieces. This is what's left of Guerin Creek, North Carolina, one of the hardest hit areas. Fire Chief Wade Wright is doing his best to stay focused on his job, despite having lost family members.
I know it'll hit eventually, but we still have our moments, but I try not to think about it right now.
This afternoon, U.S. President Joe Biden got a first-hand look at the devastation in that state after deploying another 1,000 soldiers to help deliver crucial supplies to isolated communities. Nearly a week after Hurricane Helene made landfall, more than 1 million people are still without power, hundreds missing, and the death toll climbing past 180 across 6 states. New research suggests many more people die long after a storm has passed.
We estimate about 7,000 to 11,000 excess deaths per storm are generated by these storms over a bunch of indirect channels over many, many years, which is about 300 times greater than any official accounting of the direct deaths.
Co-author Rachel Young says the loss of life stems from physical and mental stress to social and economic changes. The study found the risk is higher for certain groups, with Black individuals 3 times more likely to die after a hurricane than white individuals.
There's been this disinvestment in Black communities for decades and centuries for some communities. And because of that, the infrastructure that should exist in order to deal with natural disasters does not exist the same way that it may in other communities.
Researchers say their findings highlight storms pose a much greater public health burden than anyone had previously anticipated. A hidden toll they hope will come into sharper focus. Vanessa Lee, CBC News, Montreal.
A community of about 1,000 people in southwestern Ontario was partially evacuated this week. As the CBC's Chris Ensing explains, it's a safety measure put in place as work begins to repair a chemical storage tank.
Aamjiwnaang First Nation is surrounded by oil refineries and the cluster of chemical companies feeding off them. It's nicknamed Chemical Valley. This tank holds the chemical benzene.
The risk of contracting cancer increases with the length of time you're exposed to a carcinogen. Benzene is a very well-established carcinogen.
This has been my home. Plain lives on the edge of the evacuation zone. About 100 people have left this community, warned that the air they breathe might not be safe, while work is underway to repair the storage tank.
We got a really good community, but yeah, there's been some sicknesses.
It's happening by federal and provincial order, after both governments told INEOS Styrolution to reduce emissions back in the spring. People were treated in hospital for benzene exposure following a spike in air monitoring readings at the time. In a statement to CBC News, INEOS says the work will reduce emissions when it's complete, but the repair process will lead to elevated levels beyond government targets. It says it respects Aamjiwnaang's choice to evacuate.
We do have a lot of members in our community, a lot of young people that do have breathing difficulties, specifically asthma.
Aamjiwnaang's chief says this is about more than one company's actions.
I was really thinking about how far we've come with Orange Shirt Day and the truth coming out and the treatment of our children, but here we are facing this right now. So I think it's just, it's an ongoing, it's a intergenerational thing.
We will continue to work with them hand in hand to monitor the situation and to intervene, again, if need be, regarding this company or other companies.
The Government of Canada is updating the Environmental Protection Act, but Plain wonders if this type of attention is too late for his community.
I'm worried for my grandchildren.
Chris Hensing, CBC News, Aamjiwnaang First Nation.
A progressive conservative candidate in New Brunswick is facing calls to resign. As the CBC's Kayla Hounsell explains, Sherry Wilson is under fire because on Monday, the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, she issued a public statement drawing a connection between residential schools and provincial gender identity policies.
As New Brunswickers gathered to honor the children who didn't come home from residential schools, a political controversy was brewing.
To have that day and their memory darkened by a comment by a person running for a political party and putting her political spin on it was very disheartening.
On the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, a progressive conservative candidate released a public statement implying a parallel between residential schools and New Brunswick's policy on gender identity in schools. Last year, the PC government reversed a policy allowing teachers to use a student's preferred name and pronouns without parental consent. Candidate Sherry Wilson wrote, "We cannot afford to repeat the tragic mistakes that destroyed the lives of thousands of Indigenous families. Therefore, I am committed to keeping the parents of minor children aware of and involved in their children's development while they are entrusted to our government schools."
We're talking about kids that were taken from their families.
On a campaign stop, the PC leader says he doesn't agree with the post.
I don't think it's a comparison of anything that yields in today's world. I think the post that was put out missed the mark.
Sherry's idea. Higgs, who was at a fundraising event with Wilson over the weekend, says the post has been removed, and as such, she wouldn't be removed from the ballot. Wilson did not respond to a request for comment. She isn't the only PC candidate to make this comparison.
It is elevating the government above the parents, right? We're seeing that. And is this not simply a repeat of what we did to the First Nations people with the residential schools?
Richardson is adamant this day of reflection should not be a polarizing flashpoint in an election campaign. Kayla Hounsell, CBC News, Halifax.
Well, the hockey season in Canada is just getting underway, but there have already been a few unsettling incidents at youth games. As the CBC's Jamie Strachan tells us, they didn't involve players, but parents.
On the ice, a hockey game between 7 and 8-year-olds. Off the ice, a brawl involving parents and at least one coach. The game is stopped, players sent to their benches. It happened at this Ontario arena, a season-opening tournament for the Clever League, which has attracted some of the best young players in the province.
I think the first thing is to make sure the kids aren't impacted. They'll do what they have to do with anyone who is aggressor, like whoever started the fights. I think, they have no place to being there.
The league refused requests for an on-camera interview, but in a statement to CBC News, it says the KSL intends to take appropriate action and has taken interim steps, including suspensions, adding violent or aggressive behavior won't be tolerated.
I think anytime behavior like that happens in front of young people is just simply not acceptable, whether it's our league or anywhere else.
Scott Oakman runs the GTHL, the largest youth hockey league in the world. With thousands of games played every year, 6 parents were banned last season for bad behavior. The latest also from this weekend, parents brawling at this youth AAA game in Toronto. He says he usually deals with at least one case of misbehaving parents every week.
We're going to get to the bottom of who is involved and hold them accountable. Unfortunately, these types of instances cast an image of all hockey, which really isn't the case, and all parents are kind of tainted with that image.
These are isolated incidents, outliers among mostly positive experiences, but experts say a product of an increasingly competitive culture surrounding elite youth sports.
We pay an awful lot of money to have our kids involved in sport. Sometimes parents feel completely entitled. So we've got a lot of parents these days that are overstepping.
Some are using what happened as a lesson.
I actually mentioned it to him as like a learning point. So there's nothing wrong with looking at what the mistakes adults are making and learning from it.
A chance to take something good away from this ugly incident. Jamie Strachan, CBC News, Toronto.
Restaurant work can be tough, especially when some people don't see it as a job of value. After the break, we hear from restaurant workers on the pressures they face and how their jobs keep them inspired. Stick around. Darius Madavi is back with our second look at the weather, BC-wide, but we're going to start on the other side of the Pacific.
Yes, that's right. We have a typhoon moving in. Fortunately, it has weakened a little bit before it's going to make landfall in Taiwan. But you can see here, still a very large storm. If we take a look at what's happened, you can see here developing very quickly from a tropical storm into a super typhoon, which is the strongest classification. Fortunately, then some unfavorable conditions mean that it has dropped back down to a normal typhoon, the most weak kind of typhoon. It is then expected to move over land and make landfall and then quickly drop back into a tropical storm and then a tropical depression and then just a low. But worth noting, usually, Taiwan is not a stranger to typhoons by any means, but usually they hit on the very mountainous and sparsely populated eastern side of the country. This one is coming in from the west, where about 90% of all people live in Taiwan. So this is going to be a much more felt impact for people there in the country. So definitely notable. You can see here it's developed over the last few hours. And if we take a look, you can see how much moisture is being packed in that storm. So a lot of rain expected as well as those strong winds. But speaking of moisture, if we turn wow, that is quite the animation. Turn here to BC. We also have some moisture feeding into our province, and we'll continue to over the next few days. You can see here, if we wait a minute, here we go. It starts to come. The blue there, that's going to be some moisture that's going to be feeding into the north and central coast. A lot of the energy has been directed towards the north and central coast over the last few days, and it's expected to continue into the end of the week. Most of our moisture, most of our the strongest winds being directed to that part of the province. So the south coast, other than maybe the North Island, getting off fairly easy. You can see here that rain coming in. The next storm system going to swoop in here. And you can see it's starting to develop that rotation as it moves in to Terrace and Bella Coola there on the map. But just the remnants of that really coming down to the south coast. Decent amount of it breaking into the central interior as well. And because of those lows that continue to fall, also seeing some of that fall as snow as well. So yeah, decent amount of moisture coming in and another wave likely to come for the weekend, but unlikely to make its way down to the southern half of Vancouver Island or the lower mainland. In terms of temperatures, those are also feeling pretty seasonal, especially over the next couple of days. We got a bit of a drop on Friday, but then, especially here on the south coast, but then coming back up for the weekend, quite a bit above seasonal, 3 or 4 degrees above. So we're going to be just close to 20 degrees or so here on the lower mainland. Lots of sunny conditions across the province tomorrow. A little bit of precipitation still in parts of the coast, but overall, fairly calm tomorrow across BC. And if we take a look at our 5-day forecast here in Vancouver, Dan, again, we've got a bit of a sunny and cloudy day at times tomorrow, clearing up for around midday and then clouding again. Rain on Friday, and then warmer and sunnier weekend.
Okay, that sounds good. Thanks very much, Darius.
Thank you.
Well, it is a question many restaurant workers hear from customers. When are you going to get a real job? Some workers, though, say it's a distorted view of what their work entails and makes them think twice about their own careers. We spoke with some BC workers and industry experts about how restaurant work is perceived.
What comes to mind when we think about the restaurant industry? Is it the tasty food? That crisp, cold beer? The laughter amongst friends? Or that extra shot you definitely did not need? Whatever it might be, chances are the restaurant industry plays a vital part in your social and hungry life. But of all those experiences, what do you make of those who prepare your cocktail or hamburger? What are your thoughts of them? At a time when worker retention has become a big issue for this industry, some say there's a brewing sense of stigma around what it means to be a hospitality worker. And not in a positive sense, mind you. According to a number of restaurant workers in Vancouver, there's a troubling question they often encounter. When are you going to get a real job? And it's that question that's caused some restaurant workers in Vancouver to rethink how they see their profession.
It's such an audacious question to even ask anybody. And it's something that's very personal, obviously, to a lot of us in the industry. But then it just goes into like assuming across the board that this isn't something that you have anticipated as going to be your career choice and something that you enjoy doing.
I sometimes feel troubled by the notion that this is a job that is a stepping stone to your real life.
The idea of getting asked that question on top of your own feelings, I can only imagine is quite debilitating if you get that question a lot, especially from family members or close friends. It's not an okay thing to ask. It's not a cool thing to ask.
Whilst that isn't a slanderous statement necessarily, they may or may not realize that that can be a little bit damaging. More so the question of like, oh, so what else do you do? Like as if there's an assumption that there's another job. I would politely remind the guest of the comical factor of them expecting someone to come and serve their table whilst coming out to our house, to our restaurant, to eat our food and drink our drinks, whilst asking the person who is currently at work whether that's a real job or not.
It can be and is often demeaning, and I mean, people can be terrible, and it's no longer fun anymore.
I feel very sad, but one thing the pandemic did, I don't know why it shamed the idea of being a server as a professional. It shamed the idea of being a server.
So, what can these experiences mean for people thinking about long-term careers in the industry? Dr. Moira Kachia is a psychology lecturer at the University of West London in the UK, and she says it can reshape people's perceptions of the sector.
Again, in terms of belonging, if we haven't really seen a positive model of what it's like to belong to a social group within a work setting, then it's likely that we will have preconceptions. We will have these preconceptions of what we expect it to be.
For an industry struggling to fill staffing gaps since the pandemic, those preconceptions can have lasting implications, including when it comes to retraining and hiring staff. Ian Tossinson is the BC Restaurants and Food Services Association's CEO.
It comes back to your original question is, people don't go into it as, I want to develop a career here, unless it's more restaurant corporate or restaurant administration management. They don't go into it with the fact that this is my long-term aspiration. And so I think that's where they sort of drift. They go, okay, I'm going to school, I have a degree, I'll go do something else. I think that's the biggest problem with their retention.
It's important to highlight that not all workers are deterred by this question. James Morrison, a server at Dachi and Annalena, says it's an industry he sees himself working in for a long time.
If you are in this industry for, finding that gratification from the way other people view you, then I don't think your heart's in the right place. I feel like it does actually have to come from within, and there's a reason that I am drawn to it, and that is the reason. I feel like you can find validation in making other people happy, and placing yourself in that subservient role more or less, but if you're going to burn out if that's where you're getting your value and your joys from the restaurant industry, is from the way it comes back to you. I feel like it's an entirely internal process, is the way that it makes you feel, not the way that other people reacting to you making them feel good. Like, that is immaterial to me.
James's boss at Dachi, Miki Ellis, shares a similar sentiment.
I think that sort of question isn't always, the few times that I've heard it, it's not done intentionally, like to be intentionally mean or hurtful, but it doesn't feel good, and I don't think that that is a positive way to frame a question to any person. I don't think it's a reasonable question, but I also very much love what I do and believe that restaurants can be a really important part of a neighborhood or a community, and so I see value in it, and don't try and take note of that kind of negative.
And multiple organizations have endeavored to address some of these concerns, such as the Chef's Table Society with their Restaurant Culture Shift pilot project. Here is Shauna Gardam, Executive Director of Chef's Table Society, explaining what they hope to achieve with their initiative.
It's a 20-month project, but it's basically a toolkit for medium to small size businesses to create better cultures and workplaces so we retain more people.
For Dala Al-Chami, owner of popular Middle Eastern restaurants Super Baba and Mishmish, having a broader lens towards this sector, in his eyes, will go a long way to establishing a more appropriate public perception.
I think it's a little bit detrimental to perpetuate the idea that the restaurant industry is not a career. We all love restaurants, we all go to restaurants, and I think we just need to do a better job of showing the people who work in those restaurants, who service your tables, who make your food, who own the restaurants, a little bit more, show them a little bit more that we value them and that they're important to us because we celebrate all our greatest moments at restaurants.
So while there are many in Vancouver's restaurant industry who say they are passionate about their work, questions about their profession persist and contribute to ongoing challenges around hiring and retaining staff. In the next episode, we'll learn more about what those issues are and the initiatives that have been set up to address them.
Thank you for joining us. Have a lovely evening.
Coming up, the last surviving member of the legendary Asahi baseball team in Vancouver has died. More on his long legacy after this.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell, and this is your CBC Inbox.
CBC is the premier media partner of the 2024 Chutzpah Festival, November 1st to the 10th. The festival showcases international celebrations of dance, music, theater, comedy, and multimedia arts. For tickets, visit chutzpahfestival.com. And on November 7th, join CBC guest host Stephen Quinn at the 26th Annual Surrey Business Excellence Awards. For tickets, visit businessinsurrey.com.
The last surviving member of the legendary Vancouver Asahi baseball team has died. Kaye Kamenishi was 102 years old and surrounded by his family in Kamloops.
It's a great sadness for us, and we've always enjoyed celebrating his birthdays every single year, and we'll miss it this year. Obviously, it's not. It'll be a different occasion for us now that he is no longer with us.
This year, January 11th was declared the Vancouver Asahi Day. and Kamenishi was there to accept the honor.
Congratulations on this day. What do you think about it?
Oh, thank you very much. Oh, you know, it's to me, so happy to see still people thinking about the Vancouver baseball, you know.
So today is your birthday. It's quite a gift, isn't it?
Yeah, that's for sure.
Dad grew up in Vancouver. He was born and raised in Vancouver. And for him to be recognized by the city of Vancouver, by the mayor, he's still sort of in disbelief on what's going on.
Our generation dream about getting to work in Asahi Union. So to me, it's a really honor to work in, you know, seems to be representing the Japanese community.
As we heard, Kamenishi was born in Vancouver and grew up in Hiroshima, where he learned to play baseball. He returned to Canada in 1933 and joined the Asahi team in 1939 at age 17.
The team was active for almost 3 decades before it was disbanded due to the government internment of Japanese Canadians during the Second World War. What a legacy.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for being with us tonight on CBC Vancouver News at 6. You can watch this newscast on CBC Gem, our free app, as well as on YouTube and our website, cbc.ca/BC.
And Michelle Gassoub will have your next local news at 11 o'clock, right after the National. So please join her then. Good night.